Welcome to this webinar. This live webinar. We're going to talk and discover about the yips, and this is something that it's not often talked about actually, but a lot of people do actually have a challenge around this to a small or greater extent. So I'm just going to do a little thing which is called a poll, just to get you interacting. And if you can answer there's the first question is like, what situations can bring on the yips for you? So if you can just click into that, and you can click more than one, I believe you should be able to. If you can click on that, if you're able to, and it depends where you're watching this from. If you're doing it on a phone, it might be harder to do that. But if you're able to click on this, we've got different options here. You've got short putts with people around you. You've got all lengths of putts, all different types of putts. Now somebody's responded there with the driver yips. Yeah. Okay, it happens for sure. It's less common, but it does happen. Chipping and putting tend to be the majority of golfing, where golfing yips can appear. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail on that. Anybody else want to contribute into that? If you're able to, click on one of those areas that you feel responds to you. It just highlights some of the different areas that we can have the yips can come. And as I say, uncharacteristically, we have one person voted, and I'm gonna end the poll. One person's voted, and I'm going to share the results. Yeah, one person voted. And that was about the driving yips, which happens, but it's less common than the others. Please feel free to type in questions in the Q&A section. You should be able to find a little bit there, and anything you want to ask as we're going through, I'll answer all the questions at the end of the session. Okay, so let's get on with the show, as it were. So the content of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about, what are the yips? What causes the yips? What are the yips and what causes the yips? I'm going to introduce you to the idea that there are 2/3 different types of yips, and there are different ways of dealing with these different types. One of them has a different way that will only work for that particular method. The other problem you can use multiple methods for. So, what causes the yips? What to do to clear the different types. We're going to go into that as well. So let's go into this. What are the yips? There's a question here. How are full swing yips and chip yips related? Yes, yes, okay. Well, I'm going to answer that one by text, but I will answer it in the course of the presentation. Actually, you'll get an understanding of that. So what are the yips? They were first actually named by a Scottish professional golfer, Tommy Armour, in the 1920s. He described it as like a brain spasm, and he's actually pretty close to the truth when he uses that word. When he uses the idea that it's a brain spasm, it very much is that type of a problem. It's related to the brain. Wikipedia defines the yips it's a loss of fine motor skills in athletes, and I'm going to talk about this. It actually occurs in many different sports, not just golf. It really is universal to sport. It occurs suddenly and without any apparent explanation. Usually it happens more often with older athletes with more experience, so they've played longer. It's poorly understood, and this is what Wikipedia says, and it says it has no known treatment or therapy. Well, I'd like to sort of counter that. So I don't agree with that statement. It's not necessarily, depending on how challenging your yips are, it's not necessarily super easy to treat, but it is treatable. Athletes affected by the yips sometimes recover their ability. It may require a change of technique, and I'm going to talk about that and explain why that's the case. Many people are forced to abandon their sport, at the highest level, and this has happened, a lot with many very famous golfers. The yips manifest themselves as twitches, jitters, staggers, jerks. The condition occurs most often in sports which athletes are required to perform a single, precise, and well-timed action. Examples obviously are putting, chipping, darts is another one, shooting is another one, archery is another one. It's experienced by snooker players, it's experienced by bowlers in cricket, it's experienced by pitchers in baseball. So it's pretty common. Don't just think that golf is the only one that suffers from this problem. It's not the case. And Webster's dictionary, it's a state of nervous tension that they describe it slightly differently. A state of nervous tension affecting an athlete in the performance of a crucial action. And interestingly, below this, it also defines that golfers may or may not be aware of this state of tension, and so often they look to technique for a solution. And that's certainly my experience as a performance coach, a mental game coach. A lot of people around me who originally struggle with the yips, they try very much to change technique, and they focus on technique initially, and usually with very poor results. There is a way you can completely change the technique and the way that you hold the club. Certainly possible more with putting than it is with anything else. Be difficult to do that with driving. But a lot of putting yips have been successfully dealt with by changing the technique, and I'll explain why that works as we go forward. Okay, so yeah, it affects other sports. Darts, it's known as dartitis. Archery, it's known as target panic. Gun shooting, it's known as flinching. Baseball pitching, it's been known as the monster or the creature. And yeah, it sort of sums it up, doesn't it? I mean, for those of us, and I include myself, because I certainly have had a form of chipping yips in my history as a golfer. I'm a fanatical golfer with a handicap of 7, and yeah, it definitely has affected my game sometimes. There was quite a famous, a well-known research done by the Mayo Clinic, and they studied several hundred golfers, and they did a big report on it. And one of their sort of statistics was to say that 33 to 48% of all serious golfers have experienced the yips. That's a huge percentage. And I'm assuming it affects them not necessarily to the same level, and people can sort of manage and get around it. But when it's not too bad, but when it does get really bad, then it can really become devastating for enjoyment and performance. It also suggests that golfers who have played more than 25 years appear most prone to the condition. Well, I've certainly worked with juniors who have only been playing golf for like 9 years, and they had very bad yips. So it's, there's a caveat around that, but I think certainly the more time you play, the more chance you've got of developing the yips. But I'm going to teach you in this program some ways to make yourself yip proof. Okay, so other factors about the yips are that it tends to happen in one hand only, and it happens very much at the moment of contact. It's like this anticipation of just as you're about to strike the ball is when the muscle twitch happens, and it's an unconscious thing. You can't control it. You're not able to actually physically stop yourself doing it. It's because it comes from an unconscious part of your brain. It does not come from the conscious control part of your brain. And that's one of the reasons it makes it sort of so frustrating for golfers. Just a look Q&A. Okay, that's over there. Okay. So, yes, next slide. So this first type is described as vocal dystonia. This is a recent suggestion of one of the possible sort of causes of it, and it's a damage of the neurons. It's a damage of the nervous system that controls the movement, and it's not at all related to anxiety. There's no anxiety present. The problem twitch happens whether someone is performing in a pressure situation or not. So it seems to have no relationship to pressure, and it's not about. It's just simply the movement that's been. They still don't really understand what causes this to happen. But maybe it's some sort of with regular usage of that particular movement, the neuron somehow misfunctions, doesn't fire properly. This can lead to, if you start off with it like this vocal dystonia, that can obviously lead to an anxiety coming about because of it. So you can have a secondary level of anxiety after this initial vocal dystonia started. People who are talking about this suggest this is a much smaller percentage of the total number of people that struggle with the yips. I have a question mark around this. I wonder whether it is simply just related to these second and third types, but people just are not really fully aware of the anxiety and the tension that's there. But I'm open to that. I'm certainly not an expert in treating focal dystonia, and there isn't really any major cure for it. What tends to happen with people who have focal dystonia is that they have to change the movement pattern. Assuming that the problem is caused by a particular movement being repeated and repeated and repeated. If you change the movement and you have a different movement, and it involves different muscles, that's one way of getting around the problem. So an example of that for putting would be changing the grip. Instead of having a claw grip instead of a regular face of hand versus face of hand grip. That's a normal putting grip. When you change to a claw grip, you're completely changing the muscles that you're using, and that can solve the problem. And it worked very well for Bernard Langer and quite a few other golfers who ended up using different grips. Obviously, most of you will probably know the change in law around the belly grip, the belly putter, that's now no longer allowable. And so some people who were using that are now struggling to find an alternative that doesn't cause them a problem. So performance anxiety. I'm just going to go back one there. So performance anxiety is the second type of challenge, and I'm going to go into that in more detail. And significant emotional event is the next one as well. So those two are very similar. I would argue that the performance anxiety one is more sort of like a gradual exposure to anxiety, no specific major events happening, but with a persistent and sort of chronic exposure to an anxious situation that can create the yips. And I'm going to explain that a bit more. And then this third type, this significant emotional event, is about when something really very, very embarrassing happens, usually in front of other people or at a moment of intense pressure, or and the performance was really needed. There were other people counting on you. A situation that it was very embarrassing, and that leads to that's the main, can be one of the main causes of the yips, and I'll explain why going forward. So going into, let's have a look, sorry. Yeah, so going into focal dystonia, misfiring of the neurons in the sensory motor cortex. It's an unknown cause. There's no anxiety associated. And as I said, the main treatment is changing the muscles that you use to make the movement. And that's about, with putting, it's about changing the grip. So that's what one. I'm not going to talk much about that today. The next one is performance anxiety. Now, Ainsley Smith and her colleagues at the Mayo Institute, they define this as extreme anxiety, which resulted in an increase in self-awareness and attention to the performance itself. So that, in effect, another way of saying it's like paralysis by analysis. When people get in a situation that's stressful, we sort of want to take control over it. We want to sort of force it to happen. And unfortunately, this really can get in the way. Once a physical movement has been learnt, it actually goes into the unconscious sort of programming in the motor cortex of our brains. And it'll function far more efficiently when we're actually not focusing on how to do it. We're just focusing on the result, on what we're trying to focusing on the target, for example. We don't focus on the movement that we need to make in order to put the ball into the hole. We just focus on the target itself, or the line that we're wanting to roll the ball on. There's been a lot of written about this, and it certainly is very much my experience that this is one of the major causes causes of the yips. The good news about this type of problem is that it's easier to treat. I've had people I've worked with who have very much had this problem, and when I've given them something else to do instead of focusing on their technique, then it went away. The problem was solved. So if you've got this type of like a mild anxiety, mild you're focusing on technique too much, that's fairly easy to treat. So that's the good news about this particular Yips called the Yips problem. So yeah, and things that can create this challenge, this emotional sort of pressure, this fear of embarrassment, fear of failing, maybe that the putt or the shot is perceived as being really important. It's an important competition, for example, and we're learning how to handle pressure can really help you. And I'm going to give you some tips later on in this presentation. So one of the best ways, and this is the treatment that I use very often with people with that type of Yips problem, is to give them something to distract them while they're making their movement. Pia Nielsen and Lynn Marriott from Vision 54, they talk about the play box, and this is where we make our movements. This is where we actually hit the ball, and they repeat that this is probably one of the most important parts, the most important part of the golf routine. And they suggest that we should be focusing on our senses. We should be focusing on something in the present moment. It can be like feeling our feet. It can be listening to the contact of the ball. It can be counting. Is it like you're counting in your head? It's a distraction. You're distracting yourself from consciously trying to control the movement. This first started with Timothy Galway. He made this concept very clear, and he suggested that we can use like two words: back as you move the putter back, and hit as you move the putter forward. And this is something that could be done with driving as well. I always encourage my golfers to have a play box that works for them and that they can focus on. And it just helps us to take our mind off of technique. We do not want to be thinking about technique when we're making the shot, particularly if we're experienced golfers and we've got some skill, as we've got skill levels. We want to be focusing more on the target and just letting our brains do the movement that it knows how to do. We don't want to be interfering with that. And this is where having these play box skills can really, really support us. So the last one is a significant emotional event. And this is one of the ones that tends to, it can be a fairly easy one to treat. And it can be, depending on how many of them you've had and how young you were when you had it, it can be more or less easy to treat. For example, things that can happen to us. I was working with a professional golfer who was playing in a tournament and doing very well right at the end of the competition, and he thinned a chip over the green, and he found it very, very embarrassing, and that was when his Yips started. It was after that. So how, if you're aware of any significant emotional event that you've experienced, that's worth looking at. And I'm going to explain how we would treat that and how we would work with that. Embarrassment is, situations that lead to embarrassment. There we are. So I've got a slight delay on my. Yeah, I mean, embarrassing situations. This is usually, what can imprint in our brains the message of the problem that creates the yips. And I'm going to go on again. And the fact that it might be a shock and it's unexpected can also make it worse as well. So I'm going to explain a little bit about my understanding of what happens here. When we have things happen, when we've been in a situation that is embarrassing for us, when we are, and putting is often one, driving can definitely be one, driving off the first tee and people are watching us. If we feel that sense of embarrassment, our brains register it as a threat, as a bit of like a mini trauma, and with sort of repeated exposure, either repeated mild exposure, so it becomes like a chronic thing that can lead to the yips, or a big event and a one-off thing that was very, very embarrassing that can sort of start it quite quickly. Either of those two ways, our system can become sensitized to a certain scenario, if you like. The brain remembers scenarios that are potentially we think of them as being dangerous. This is our old brain that was trying to protect us, but it remembers what was going on, and it knows that being on a putting green with a ball and a hole a few feet away, potentially that can be very embarrassing for me, particularly if I've been embarrassed in the past. And what happens is that the brain tries to almost stop us doing it. It says, don't do it. Don't put this. You're gonna be embarrassed. It's dangerous, and that's where this neuromuscular sort of sabotage comes in and affects the movement. This has been very much my understanding of how the yips happen. That it's partly our deeper brain, our evolutionary brain, trying to protect us from embarrassment, from what it perceives as being something quite dangerous. I mean, actually, evolutionarily, embarrassment and sort of other people looking at us and seeing us as being strange was very threatening. In the tribal times, if we did something odd and we were sort of singled out, it could be life-threatening for us. So this type of social embarrassment is deeply, deeply rooted into our brains as being something to avoid at a very deep level. And I think this is where the cause of the yips comes from. It's our deeper brain saying, don't do it. It's dangerous, effectively. It seems strange to say that, but that's how our brains can interpret these embarrassing situations, either chronic, long-term embarrassment, regular exposure to it, or an extreme event. Another factor for significant emotional event is, as I mentioned, is if you're playing in a team and the team are like expecting you to win, and they're relying on you. This social relational piece is a very important part of how our system can get very scared, get very nervous. So I'm going to talk about one of the ways that I've been using to clear the yips. And I don't think I can get this to work. Here we are. This is actually a video. There you go. Sorry about the really bad pun at the end there. Um, yeah, this is definitely one way that I have personally experienced works to clear the sort of the emotional. It won't work for focal dystonia because the focal dystonia is not related to emotion and this fear part of the brain, but it does work for both the emotional, the anxiety, performance anxiety type, the mild sort of milder type of yips, and it definitely works very well for the significant emotional event part of the yips as well. Um, so, what else am I going to say? So yeah, okay, okay, yeah. EFT. Yeah, the latest research on EFT is indicating that the tapping sort of it resets the emotional part of the brain from a fight flight response to a more neutral state. It sort of disconnects the part of the brain that's saying this is dangerous, and to sort of like going, oh no, it's not dangerous, this is okay. And yeah, I've been using it for about 10 years now. I've been using it for lots of different things, not for just for clearing the yips, and it is very, very powerful and works for the vast majority of people. I would say like 90% of the people that try it, it works for them. Okay. So going into other ways that you can really help yourself and yip proof your game. One of the, if you understand that the yips are caused by us reacting emotionally and getting emotional and telling that and the brain like reading, oh, this is dangerous, this is dangerous. If you're reacting badly to a missed putt and you're getting emotionally upset, you're potentially setting yourself up for in the long term for creating this type of performance anxiety and that sort of second type. And so you really don't want to be doing that. So instead of reacting emotionally to missed putts, reacting emotionally to missed chips, etc., etc., you really want to try to react neutrally as ideally neutrally to poor shots and positively to good shots. One way, it's just a slight delay on this. The brain stores memories better with emotion, and every time you have an emotional response, you're sort of saying, remember that. And if it's like a strong negatively emotional response, your brain can read it. Oh, this isn't this. I need to avoid this. This is dangerous, and this is where the yips can develop. So you really do not want to be reacting badly to your shots, and that's something that I teach, and I teach how to do that. It's not something I can just, I can say to you, don't react badly, and that's not really very helpful for you. But there are methods that you can learn to use your body, use your breathing, use some phrases to say to yourself, so you can train yourself to not react so emotionally after poor shots, after things haven't gone well. So that's one way to yip proof yourself. Don't react negatively. Yeah, like a phrase you could say to yourself, just this general concept that it's reminding yourself that it's not really a threatening situation. If people see you miss it, it's okay, that people are more interested in their own game. So if you consciously tell yourself and remind yourself, actually, this isn't such a threatening situation. It's okay. Everyone misses short putts. It doesn't need to be threatening. So using your logical brain to try and calm the sort of more monkey brain that's reacting to the sort of deeper social fear. You really want to be managing your self-talk. If you're continually saying bad things to yourself, you're increasing this chance of developing this anxiety, so generalized anxiety over certain shots. So start to notice your inner voice on the greens. Stop and redirect any unhelpful self-talk and replace it with a really, a friendly voice of the best caddy. It takes time to do that, and it's not something that you can just suddenly say, oh, I'm going to do that now. You actually have to practice it. So here's a simple tip for you. Instead of reacting badly to your putts or getting upset, if you instead focus on one good thing that you did with that putt or chip or drive, you consciously and with an intention say to yourself, what's one thing I did well there? It might be that it was a nice smooth stroke. It might be that you really chose a very clear target. It might be that you really did your routine and you felt good over the ball. But you can usually find one thing. It was a nice contact. It was a good pace for a putt. The more you can do that, the more you're going to distract yourself from going into the negative. So that's just an easy, a simple thing you can practice. Often, many golfers get totally unrealistic about what they expect themselves to do, and this creates frustration, and this partly creates some of the bad reaction. So you really want to get real about your putting expectations. Depending on what your handicap is, you're not going to sink every putt from 6 feet. The tour pro average is 66% from 6 feet. So get real. If you're a 90s golfer, your chances of sinking it from 6 foot are about 40%. So be realistic about your putting. That's what be realistic about your game in general, and don't put too much pressure on yourself. So another really good way to prevent yourself developing and also help, relieve the yips is to have a really good deep routine that you use. And by focusing on your processes, things that set you up to play well, and particularly this play box I've been talking about, that while you're making the swing, while you're making the putt, your attention is distracted in some way. You could be counting, you could be focusing something sensorial. You could be focusing on the pressure, just maintaining a constant pressure in your hands. It could be about feeling a really smooth movement, and feeling really in balance. But focusing on something to stop you going into technical and stop you going into fear as well. If you're focusing on something, distracting yourself with counting, singing, and putting your attention on something either useful or neutral, then it can really avoid that fear center from sparking up and interrupting your performance. Okay. So another thought, another idea with putting is, instead of, because what we often do over like a 4-foot putt, 3-foot putt, we have this internal voice saying, I should make this, and this should go in, and if it doesn't, it's not okay. Instead of saying that, why don't you say to yourself, is it possible for me to sink this putt? You're asking a different question, and in doing that, you'll get a different response. It's usually a more neutral, open response. So try that as a simple tip. Over those shorter putts, say to yourself, is it possible for me to sink this putt? You obviously answer, yes, it's possible. But it can take away that dire expectation, that need that you have to make it. You don't know whether you're going to make it or not. And saying, is it possible, can really take the pressure off. So there are quite a few different resources out there. Most of the ones I've seen in terms of the yips really focus on this idea of the routine, of distracting yourself, having a good play box, things like putting with looking at the hole, putting with your eyes closed. There are lots of different ways that you can free up your putting stroke. If you've developed this sort of deeper anxiety, then those tips are less likely to work, and something like EFT, I think, is going to be more successful for you. By all means, try some of these techniques. Try to use the sort of simpler methods first. If they don't work, then I would recommend that you go you try EFT as one of the methods that can really free up your yips. That's my email. If you need to get in touch with me, you have any questions, I have quite a comprehensive website, which is the www.golfmentalgamecoach.com, and you can contact me through that as well. I have one program that I would recommend to you. This is a program by Patrick Cohen, and this is something. This again will be focusing on won't be focusing on using EFT. It'll be focusing on understanding the fears. It'll be focusing on having a good routine, using breathing techniques. It'll be on finding ways to relax. Again, that can work for you. So if you were to search it, you'd type in breaking the Yips cycle, you'll find more information about that. If you wanted to work with me, then just get in touch basically, and I can sort of explain to you how the program would work. Usually, depending on how long you've had it, you want at least a minimum of three sessions. It usually takes a little bit longer than that. It depends on how severe your problem is. But I'm happy to talk to you and discuss that. Everyone is different, so I don't want to give any specific answers to that. And to come back to this question, how are the full yips, pups and chips yips related? Are the solutions similar? They're related because it's just about this fear of this deeper fear of anxiety, this fight flight brain response that gets kicked in when we make an embarrassing drive or chip or putt. That the brain registers it in the same way. This is fearful. This is dangerous. This is a scary situation. And with time, and also depending on the amplitude of that embarrassment, it can be quicker than not. You can develop the yips. So, and the solutions are the same. That you use your playbox skills, and you might use a technique to free up the embedded pattern in your brain, and there are EFTs is a very good method for that. Okay, hope that's been useful. Look forward to if you have any questions, please get in touch. I'd love to support you. Thank you.